Hello, my friends. We are live once again. We have the Thursday night International Leftist Coalition panel. One of my favorite panels to do.
Friends, we are live
Welcome to the
once
show. We have
again.
Kareem Batesh, Peter Petey, and Asal Rod as well. And this is a topic I'm very interested in talking about. And it's something that we actually discuss a lot on the show. Like how you actually talk to people, right? How do you actually get people on your side? And the channel is kind of our Marxist socials circle. I hang around my friends, right? So it's super easy for us all the time. I'll be like, yeah, fuck the government, fuck the police, abolish capitalism. Cause we hanging out with each other, right? But I explained before, like when I canvass and when I was giving speeches in barbershops, when I was talking to like black elders, like there's a different approach you have, right? Like there's a different way I'll talk to someone who's my age, who I know maybe be a little bit more anti-capitalist, versus someone who I see who had like a Bill Clinton poster in the living room, right? There's a different approach you have for that. But before I dive into my personal take on this, I actually want to start with Peter Beatty, and then I'm gonna get Kareem Batesh and we get Saul Rod in here because this is something I've seen that you guys actually talk about before. So I just want to get Peter Beatty the first shot. Try to explain your mindset behind political persuasion, and the floor is yours, Peter. You're muted, Peter.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Nick, you've
Okay.
discussed times in the past of your experiences trying to educate people about politics, and Kareem and I had a discussion, and Kareem had a good anecdote. And I thought that what we could do is last week, or the last time we all talked, one of the viewers sent in a question about about how do you actually educate people. So I figured what we could do is ask you guys for stories, that those sorts of experiences, and then we can discuss like the psychological dynamics going on behind it, which might help people in their own efforts to persuade and educate people. There's a lot of research in psychology about persuasion, but there aren't any like silver bullets. There's no like guaranteed way of educating somebody or persuading somebody of something. But I think by talking about some of the psychology going on behind the scenes, so to speak, we can hopefully help people get more effective at their efforts to build the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, you gotta know your audience. I think that's the important thing, and relating to people's struggle. I remember when I would first talk to someone, like it's not me immediately opposing my agenda on them. Like when I used to knock door to door, I would just ask them a simple question, like, what what is going on in your life that you think is not being answered by our government? And Peter Cream. Yeah, I remember I live in the United States. So with me just asking that question, that's a very broad. They're gonna give me something, and they usually do. And then a lot of times, oh, I'm not getting paid enough. I'm struggling to afford my healthcare bill. Boom. If you're a leftist and you can't take that layup, that's what he's looking for, right? But I want to get Kareem in. And Kareem, why do you think this topic is important, and what is your take on in general in terms of political persuasion?
Yeah, very broad topic. I think it's one of the toughest things actually within the political scene. You already see it also on YouTube. Everybody is in their own bubble, and not just between different kinds of ideologies, also within ideologies. I mean, look how separated the left is. And I think one of the biggest problems, and we will touch that, I'm sure, during this show, is that we people, and that is pure psychology, as Peter said, people are convinced by superficial characteristics of the source when they are not well educated in the topic that is being spoken about. So that means if you don't know a lot about healthcare, if you don't know a lot about imperialism, etc., you are very convinced by superficial characteristics of the source. Okay, that means somebody who looks professional, like a real politician, somebody, you name it, somebody who's popular. The problem is that the media is aware of this. So the media makes use of that political ignorance to convince people to think in ways that support the status quo. And the status quo is very bad for everyone. Okay, so I think that is something that we really need to find a way to break that cycle. How do we break that cycle of that sewer of information coming from the media to make people, to inoculate people to bullshit arguments and actually make them well educated in a way that they come to our side? You know what I mean? That's what I wanted to say.
That's
Yeah,
well said, Kareem. Go ahead, Peter. You can add to this.
and what Kareem's talking about in psychology is called the peripheral route to persuasion. When people don't know very much about a topic, or they're not very interested, or they're not paying attention very much, these so-called peripheral cues, like seeming expertise, like somebody, you know, good looking, dressed nice on TV, they're more like presented as an expert. They're more likely to accept what they're saying. But we basically have the central route to persuasion on our side. So we don't have TV stations. We don't have any serious media apparatus that can, or ecosystem that can reach tens of millions. So we have to focus on the more direct route, where we can't take advantage of these things so easily. But Nick, the example you gave is perfect. Like, you start off the conversation with, what are your concerns? What about the political system is not treating you well? What do you need? That's great for a number of reasons. One, it kind of builds a little bit of solidarity at the very beginning, because instead of you presenting yourself as, I have all the knowledge, I need to put it in your head, so you need to open up your head and let me put all my knowledge in there, you're creating this equal relationship from the very beginning by asking them to inform you first.
And you'd be surprised how open people want. When you talk to people, especially in rural America where I was, people never had people ask them that question. I was actually shocked. I asked them, like, what's going on here, like that government? Let me tell you what, brother. Like, people will immediately tell you everything. So, Peter, go ahead. I want you to finish your thought, but to add to your point, people were more than happy to tell me what's going on in their life that government is not responsible for. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what we have to realize is that when we're in a situation where we are trying to get information to someone else's head, that is a potentially very painful thing psychologically for the other person, for two main reasons. One, our view of how the world works is a very painful view. It's not, it doesn't feel good. I would love to have somebody convince me that, you know, the US empire is fundamentally good and capitalism is fundamentally good. I would sleep so much better at night. I would have much less psychological distress in my life. But we're actually trying to get people to understand the world as it really is, which is actually very painful. So we have to recognize that we have to, our mission involves causing other people pain unintentionally. And so how do we get around that? The other aspect of pain is whenever you have a belief, especially a very well-established belief with lots of reasons, you've read a lot about this issue, and you have a lot of facts in your head that support your position on this issue. If somebody's asking you to change your mind and do a 180 on this issue, that very process of rewiring your brain is experienced as painful, like, you know, climbing a mountain or something. It's a lot of effort. And so we have to recognize, first of all, that is intrinsic to our project. We're going to be causing people discomfort. So anything we can do to minimize that discomfort from the very beginning, like having the other person educate you first, like you just did. Ask them, what are your problems? What do you need out of politics? And we can go into more examples. I also just wanted to get Asal to think about, like, trying to educate people on a foreign policy issue, because if we use like a bunch of different issues, I think we can touch on a lot of important things. But not to put you on the spot, Asal, right now, but if you can
I want to get thought here as well, because I can't wait to hear her from her point of view. But that's something I noticed a lot. And when I was on the trail and I was talking to a lot of these people, they was like, Nick, you need to run for office, because the way I was talking to a lot of these people, because I seen a lot of people crash and burn. Because if you go and knock door to door and you talking to people, and then the first thing you trying to sell is a campaign, like that's some people do, like, yo, I got this campaign, I'm representing Bernie Sanders, you believe in you. People don't want to hear that shit. So I literally was like, all right, what are you struggling with? And then a lot of people will mention healthcare. Then I'm like, all right, then I'll mention Medicare for all, and then you introduce your political idea that way. And then, but as soon as people see you selling something, like you're selling a campaign, you're selling a career or somebody, that's when you immediately got this barrier instead of opening the conversation, like you said. But I want to get Saul in here to get your general thoughts on in terms of bringing people on our side and how to be a better communicator of leftist ideas. That's all. I'm glad to have you back on.
First, let me say sorry for my tech issues. So I
Okay,
am.
so we've got here Saul, amazing foreign policy takes today. So glad
You're
to
not
have
gonna
you
be able
either
to
way.
see the physical reactions to them, but I'm still having them. So I think one of the things that's interesting about listening to Nick and Peter explain the way that they would approach sort of having these conversations is it's the exact opposite approach, right? I mean, not opposite, but it's an opposite method of looking at it. Whereas Peter is looking at it in a very scientific, like empirical way. This is how people react cognitively to this kind of information. I mean, there are actual studies that say people, if you try to present people with facts that go against their views, that they'll actually dig deeper into their views rather than being convinced, right? It's not like an aha moment for them where they're like, oh my God, you're right. I've been wrong all along. And that's sort of the empirical side that Peter is talking about. What Nick is talking about is very intuitive. It's very human. And I think so often that is missing from the way that we talk about politics because we are rightfully so angry, right? We're angry about so many things. We're angry about the fact that we live in such a broken system. Not only are we angry that we live in a broken system, but that we are told every day that we live in the greatest system, right? So it's this extreme frustration. And while we can understand it from a scientific point of view, what Nick is pointing to, I think, is so important. Understanding and talking to people like human beings. Because in fact, most people, if you were to engage them in a way where you acknowledge how they feel, like I love the fact that Nick said, the first thing I ask is, what are your issues? Talk to me about you, right? People have from different demographics, from different backgrounds, for different reasons, they're focused on different things. And it's not that my issue is more important than your issue. All of our issues are important, but we need to be heard and recognized. And so I think talking to people in that way, recognizing their traumas, a lot of the views that people have is from their own traumas as well. That's really an intuitive way to connect with human beings and be able to talk to each other rather than past each other. But on top of that, there's the fact that when you look at the actual polling, when you look at statistics coming out of the United States, the opinions that we hold are the majority opinions in this country, right? A majority of Americans think that it is the responsibility of the government to provide some kind of medical treatment for all people. The majority of the country thinks that, the vast majority thinks that drug prices should be lower. Americans recognize that there's mass wealth inequality. Most Americans are opposed to the war machine. Most Americans think that there should be some kind of student loan forgiveness. These are all of the issues that we're constantly talking about, whether the domestic economic issues, whether they're foreign policy issues. And it's amazing because there's actually a lot of agreement. There's bipartisan agreement. We always talk about this, but there's a lot of agreement across the board. But as long as we allow, that's why certain things are politicized the way that they are. They're politicized intentionally to make us not be able to talk to each other, to make us seem like we don't really agree on things when we do. So you take these mundane kind of situations and you have people like at each other's throats arguing about masks when it's like there's so many bigger problems that we need to deal with. All of that is done. It's not, the media isn't doing it on accident. They're sensationalizing certain things intentionally to distract you from the things that we actually all agree on, which are fundamental to the system. So yeah, I think on one hand, there's the educational component in where Peter and Kareem talked about, where you understand sort of the psychology behind why you can't just be like, look, I have all these facts, you should listen to me. And combining that with the very grassroots person-to-person approach that Nick is talking about, where you need to connect with people and find your commonalities. And it is okay if we don't agree on everything. Like, I cannot emphasize this point enough. It is okay for us to not agree on everything. We won't. No one will. I've known Peter for years. He's a good friend of mine. We don't agree on a lot of stuff, and that's okay. And we're fine, right? So it's not a question of, if you don't agree with me on this one point, then that means you're against me and I'm against you and this conversation is over. We have to leave room for those differences as long as fundamentally we understand the things that are problematic and we try to fundamentally change those issues.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the polling data because I'm focused on all the negative stuff. Like it's really difficult to change people's minds, but pay attention to this and this and this. But as you point out, public opinion research is pretty clear that people's kind of gut feeling without much information is something that we can work on. It's actually very much in line with what we want to do politically. The thing that most people, I don't think most people don't know this. Even in political science, a lot of people with PhDs have not looked into this research at all, so they don't know it. Public opinion research over half a century is extremely clear. The overwhelming majority of people in the United States know very little about politics. And if you know the left-wing critique of the media system, and the educational system, that is precisely what you should expect, right? We have a crappy media and educational system, so people end up knowing essentially nothing about politics, unless you're a member of the very small minority, like probably everybody watching this, who is very interested in politics. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Like a lot of people I've seen on the left, they'll look at polls about Medicare for all and they'll see, the majority of the country is in favor of us. But then they'll look at other polls that ask the question a little differently. And they say, are you in favor of Medicare for all if all private insurance has to be abolished? And then a majority of people say they're not in favor of Medicare for all. And so a lot of people on the left look at that and they think, what the hell? This makes no sense. What's going on?
Same for defund.
Right, same for defund. That's exactly. People don't even know what the hell it means. That's that's a huge problem.
Peter, but just quickly add, because I've seen polls and I covered polls where they will ask people, and this is the poll they will have in the headline. They will say, "Do you support the defund the police movement?" And then most Americans are like, "Hell no." Nah. But then they will, in the same poll, they will say, "Do you support reallocating police funding to housing, to healthcare, education?" Then the number will skyrocket. So that's just another example. But go ahead, Peter.
And that's precisely what's going on. We look at that, us in this tiny little minority of people, look at those polls and we're like, what the hell are people thinking? Don't they know that it's impossible to have a universal government-run healthcare program with also private programs, because the private companies will simply snap up all the healthy people so that they get their premiums and they don't have to pay out very much at all. And then the government program will have all of the sickest people. And so it'll look year after year like it's a terrible plan because it's nowhere near as efficient as the private plan. We've read stuff like that. We've heard that argument. Most people have not. So understanding political ignorance on the one hand is, I think, actually a good thing for us, because it means we have less of the barriers that we would encounter if everyone had a very fully fleshed out opinion on everything and they had lots of facts in their heads that support their opinion on everything. That's not the case for the vast majority of the population. That's good for us. The other good thing for us is just what Asal mentioned. Polling shows that people's instincts, without a lot of information, their instinct is to go against US imperialism. They don't like it. They want a system that's much more multilateral, a global system where the UN actually decides, war and peace. So all of the examples Asal just gave, that's the reality. We have fertile soil. And the other aspect of it is that fertile soil, the population we're trying to reach, the majority of them does not have a lot of political information, which is negative in the short term, but positive in the long term, because that means we have less of an impediment coming from knowledge constraints when we're trying to persuade people.
Yeah, so you made a great point, and that's the challenge as a leftist, as an anti-capitalist, someone who's fighting against U.S. Propaganda, because there have been multiple studies that shown that people that actually engage in CNN and watch MSNBC every day, Fox News every day, they are actually less informed than people who don't watch that at all. And people are always shocked when they hear about that, and they always ask, how could that be? And I always get an example of people I know in my personal life. Like I remember during the campaign, my brother, who's not like always engaged in politics, but he's the best. He's the best example of this, right? So I always give the example of the Pete Buttigieg story, where he didn't know Pete Buttigieg before, right? He don't know all the names of all these politicians, right? But we was watching one of the debates, and when Pete Buttigieg started speaking, I remember the reaction my brother had was, "This dude's full of shit." This dude is horrible. Like, who falls for this? Like, and it was funny. But if you listen to the CNN liberal, like, imagine the person who like has, well, Rachel Maddow gone now. I don't know who's going to replace her. But imagine the person who used to have Rachel Maddow on on their DVR, who watched that shit every day. They're the kind of person who listen to Pete Buttigieg and they're like, "Oh my God, he's such a charismatic leader. He reminds me of Barack Obama." You see the difference? My brother, who does not watch CNN, who is not politically engaged like these people are, he can see through the bullshit of a Pete Buttigieg. But the person who's supposed to be informed, they got the New York Times subscription. They read a Washington Post article once a day with their morning coffee. They are the politically well-informed person. They will fall for the bullshit though, and that's the real life example of that.
I did a survey and I asked people to list like their top 5 sources of news, their political information. You know, write down like CNN, New York, whatever. This is a fill in the blank. And I got the most brilliant answer I've ever seen in my life from somebody. He just answered none. I'd rather be ignorant than misinformed. And like you said, like somebody who is completely ignorant about politics because they don't like read anything about it or watch any TV, that ignorance is above misinformed. Like they're actually better informed than the misinformed people. But like, Kareem, could you bring up the story you shared last week about your experience trying to educate someone? Because I think it's actually very similar to the story that Nick just brought up. At least I think there's some similar dynamics going on there. Do you mind just sharing that again?
Sure.
If you can post a link and I can share it as well.
I was just trying to search for I can't remember who did that. It was once on Twitter, but there's probably you can Google it about these different frames when people in the media speak about actions from Israel and actions from Palestine or Hamas. You know what I mean? Like in one case it's casualties, in other case it's killing. You know, like these asymmetrical frames that convince people who are not well versed in a topic, that convince people to think in a certain kind of direction. You know, by these very, very insidious, smart little differences in frames in the media. I think that's something we really need to pay attention to. Another example is indeed what Peter just asked from me, like to tell a story that is very comparable to what I just said. So last year, or a bit over a year ago, I was in the Netherlands visiting my family. And I walked on the street and there was this homeless person. And this homeless person asked me how I was doing because I was walking with crutches. Okay, so I had injured my foot. I was walking with crutches. The guy asked me, "Hey, what's going on? What's wrong with your foot?" And we just started talking. And we started talking for quite a while. And suddenly we started talking about jobs and he's homeless and all that kind of stuff. And the first thing he started to do was like started raving and ranting about Poles, you know, Poles, Poles, people from Poland. And saying that these effing Poles are taking our jobs and is coming over here and look at me, I'm homeless. And it's because these Poles, people, these immigrants and this and that. And my first gut feeling was anger. I was like, my first gut feeling was to say like, hey man, shut up with your stupid racism. You know what I mean? That the kind of moral outrage that I feel when people do that. But on the other hand, you have to realize, like Peter also said very wisely a while ago, that we have the curse of knowledge. So we know what's going on often, while other people are informed by mainstream media and other sources that make them think this way, even though it still angers me. And then I said to him, this is a true story, really, it's a true story. It sounds very, very idealistic, but it's true. So I said to him, I said, okay, you're angry at these Poles. Now let's be honest here. See, these people from Poland, because he's complaining that they come here to work for a very low wage. I said, these people from Poland want a job. They want to survive. They want to feed your family. You want a job. You want to survive. You want to feed your family. People from Poland come all the way over here to do a job for a very low salary. I say, who should you blame? I said, is it the person who decides that he hires the Pole and leaves you on the streets? Or is it the Polish person who is just like you, who wants to feed his family? And I kid you not, he was just quiet. His eyes went like, Yeah. Yeah. I said, who decides who gets the money? It's not you. It's not the poll. There's one person with the money who decides who gets the pie, and that person decides to go for the poll and not for you. And he was like, yeah, makes sense. And I realized, like, this guy has never heard that argument.
Yeah, that
You know
happens
what I
a
mean?
lot.
Yeah. And then you must realize how many people walk around in the country hating immigrants, hating people from Mexico, hating this, that, for taking jobs and then, and just not thinking about who decides who gets the jobs, man. You know what I mean? So I think that is so important, that media framing, and that we find a way to, like, to defend ourselves against that stuff. Yeah, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No, it's funny because you gave the international version of what I deal with all the time, being in a red state. And this is why I tell people I enjoy engaging with conservatives. I do it all the time. And I have a different way of thinking than the United States capitalist groupthink, where the common groupthink and the culture war that is used to divide the workers and to deflect blame from the ruling class is we blame immigrants. And in the United States in particular, you gave an example, but you got people that always blame the Mexicans, and the Mexicans that lowering the value of the wages. And I've been asking this my entire life to right wingers who swear by the Bible of the immigrants are lowering the wages. Billionaires and businesses are making record profits. So there's literally nothing stopping them than just paying the workers more. Like your argument would make sense if the immigrants was costing the profits of the billionaire. So if they was costing the businesses money so they couldn't pay their workers, that would make sense. But our corporations have been stealing from workers en masse, wage theft, rampant. I got a story I plan on doing this. CNN was doing a story on shoplifting. As wage theft, they steal billions from us, but they never do stories on that. I'm actually might bring it up today. I actually want to see what Peter thinks about that. But you see what they talk about shoplifting, but they never talk about wage theft. So why it never made sense to me my entire life why you guys blame immigrants and Mexicans for wages not being increased when the billionaires are making record profits. So the person that is, and we showed an example of not a low skilled worker, but a high skilled worker. There was this lady we showed that was a field worker, and she was doing. It was amazing the speed in which she worked. Steve from the suburbs, you're not doing that job, and that person that is doing the job has nothing to do with the fact that the Walton family is not paying their employees their fair labor costs. And the last thing I want to say before I continue this rant, Jeff Bezos could pay every single Amazon worker $100,000 per year without even touching Amazon funds. We talking about his money. So how do you blame the immigrant? The immigrants, you're Amazon. There's a right-wing Amazon worker somewhere that's like, fucking Jose is the reason why Jeff Bezos is not paying me money. How does that make sense? I would love someone to explain this to me, and I've been waiting for the explanation my whole life. But Peter, Saul, do you guys want to chime in before I move on to the next part of this? Do you guys have anything you want to share as well?
Peter, do you want to go?
Sure. Just to kind of like wrap up these two stories, I think the things to draw from that is in both cases you're dealing with people that are not like, MSNBC heads that are or Fox News people that watch it all the time. You guys were dealing with normal people. I can't reiterate this enough. For decades now, since the late 1950s, political scientists studying public opinion in the US have found that only 1 out of every 5 people can even define what liberalism and conservatism are. So 4 out of 10, 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10 people that you meet are going to be of a level of political knowledge that is insufficient to define the main dividing line in US politics. So when you're dealing with the majority of people, like in these two examples, you're not going to run so much into people who have heard counter arguments to your position. You can introduce them to arguments that they've never heard before, and they can be very persuasive. But keep in mind, if you're dealing with the 1 out of 5 people, which is what you do if you're arguing with people on Twitter about politics, or if you're arguing with people that come out to a some sort of politically themed event, then you're dealing with the 20% of the population that has some knowledge about politics, and then you have to take a different tack. But the first thing I think you should do is try to assess like what level of indoctrination or what level of knowledge, what level of information am I dealing with? And then if it's the majority of the population, a move like what Nick and Kareem just did in these 2 examples, I think is exactly right. You can just present people with arguments they've never heard before, and you can convince them because the other side's arguments aren't really good. Like the anti-immigrant thing, it's a crap argument. It's dumb, but it spreads widely because it's simple. And people can look at like a construction site and see a bunch of immigrant workers and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's what's happening. The immigrants are taking all my jobs. That's why my life sucks. It's a message that takes like 30 seconds to spread. But when you're dealing with someone like that doesn't have a lot of information, the counter argument, which they've never heard before, can be very persuasive. It's a little different when you're dealing with somebody who is in the 20% or even smaller group of real political junkies. But we can get to that too. Sorry, Asal, do you have any experiences trying to educate people on foreign policy?
I can't. I tried to think about it, and I'm like, I can't think of, because usually it's students, and they tend to be more receptive because they're younger and they're listening, and they have a very different media diet than older generations. But I did want to say one thing about how we're talking about why these sort of narratives come about. Like, why do people blame immigrants? Well, because they're told to, right? It's not like they're just doing it randomly. People aren't like doing it out of malice alone. They're doing it because they're being told by media, by politicians that this is who you should blame. You shouldn't blame the corporations. They're not the problem. And there's an aspect to the media I feel like we haven't mentioned, which is it's for profit. Right? Like the media that we are talking about, when they say corporate media, the meaning of that is that they run a for-profit industry. So why does Fox News pander to a certain group of people? Because the more viewers they get of that group of people, they get advertisers for specific products tailored to that group of people, and that's how they make money. Right? Like these anchors that you see, these people who are on these networks are not poor people. They're very wealthy, right? They're not, you don't think of them as like, quote, celebrities in the way that you think of people in music and in entertainment, but they are literally entertainers. That's what they are. They are not journalists. They're not doing journalism. Journalism is not parroting the talking points of the state. Journalism is challenging them. It's investigative. It's asking questions. It's not just bringing people on to give their opinions and staring at them blankly. But that's what you see most of the time. And when you see these sort of like outlandish debates on media as well, like on Fox News or even on CNN, and then that video goes viral, all of it is intentional. They bring people with outlandish views intentionally to create this kind of kerfuffle so that it becomes a viral video, so that again they get advertising, they get people. And so it is, I mean, look, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Just like think about this for a moment. You have the richest person, I think it's either first or second, I don't know, they keep going back and forth, but one of the richest people in the world, potentially in history, owning what is considered one of the most important like newspapers in the country. And so it's not a coincidence that you get narratives within that paper that say, hey, don't blame billionaires, or we shouldn't tax the wealthy. And well, of course, because a wealthy person owns it. So when these things, when we talk about certain industries, when they are not owned by the people, when they are for-profit industries, what is their end goal? Profit. So they don't really care about the news. And so it's really important to think about those news sources, why alternative media sources are so important, why like public broadcasts are something important to act. They're a little bit better, right? Like they're a little bit better than what you see if you watch CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. So that's just something I thought that we should keep in mind when we're talking about how people are consuming information and why these narratives are created in their minds.
Yeah, it's funny. You and Peter just went to, I actually divided this into 2 parts. The first part we already dived into. In the second part of the conversation, I was actually about to do a media analysis and the role of them keeping people radicalized, keeping people divided, and the obstacle that provides leftists and getting people on our side. But I guess before we officially transition that part, because we are kind of into it, I want to get Kareem in here. Kareem, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think we're just naturally transitioning to that aspect, actually. What Asal said is very true. I think the whole profit motive within the media system is one of the biggest problems where it comes to political persuasion and people's education about the system. Just think about something called the Islamophobia industry. The Islamophobia industry is literally people getting super rich by hating on Muslims. Okay, it's big in Europe and in the West in general, but especially in Europe. And yeah, and it makes money, so it keeps going, and the machine becomes bigger and bigger. That's with everything for profit. It's very scary stuff. But I think there's one thing that is apparently very important here, and that is something we need to understand on the left as well. Is therefore, because there are so many people just unaware of like different arguments, how important political education is on the left. I cannot emphasize this enough. I see so many times on the left, in the comment sections, even in articles, people saying like, I am not a bookworm, I'm not theoretical left and all these theories, I'm boots on the ground and that's all I need. I'm going to tell you something, we actually all need each other, because if you're only boots on the ground without any kind of political education, you know what's going to happen? That the majority of your group is going to be persuaded by crappy arguments. So not arguments that, for example, black people are suffering under systemic unfairness within a society, but that they are lazy and criminal, okay? Or the fact that we should have private healthcare instead of public healthcare, or that you should invade certain countries because they are a threat for human rights. The problem is, if you do not politically educate people, you will see that the majority of them become very susceptible for bullshit arguments. So we do need that political education, and we do need it on the left. And I think something very good for your channel, for example, Nick, would be an educational show. And I would love to contribute to that with Peter about some of the aspects that people need to understand. For example, what is structural racism? Like what is systemic racism? That people start to understand this, because now they just think it's some kind of CRT word. And it gets bashed in the media because people don't have that political education. I think that is so crucial to inoculate people against these nonsense narratives from the mainstream media.
And that's been one of my top priorities. And I've been pushing back against the anti-intellectualism that I've seen. And what you said is so on point, because without education, you have well-informed people become reactionary. That's literally what happens. And if you guys don't believe in what Dr. Kareem Patesh is saying, all revolutionary movements have strict revolutionary code. That's how you get revolution. Do you guys really think that we can dethrone capitalism? Do you guys really think that we can get rid of the U.S. empire and the global NATO establishment by just winging it, by vibes? Just vibes, bro. Let's just wing it. We got to have revolutionary discipline. And when I see people repeat like anti-critical race theory shit, when I see people repeat anti-woke shit, that's reactionary shit that come from not being well informed about history, theory, reading. Like that's the problem with the U.S. left. Like that's the problem. And when I talk to people, like we're gonna have Dr. Luna Oy on this Saturday, and when I talk to people in the global South, when I talk to people who had successful revolutions, people who are actually getting win for the left on a global scale, they're not just having vibes, bro, and not just winging it. Like they have a plan of action, they set that plan of action, and then they will see, all right, what's the pros and cons? What didn't work here? They make an adjustment, then they change again. In the U.S. left, there's like, yeah, I know we tried to take over the Democratic Party, it didn't work the first time, but let's try it again. Vibes, bro. Like there's no learning, there's no adjustments. Like it's garbage, and that's because
how can you fight something if? Sorry, yeah, no, I just wanted to say, how can you fight something if you do not know what to fight? It's so important to understand the structures of our system that's keeping us all in a very bad position, and some, of course, way more than others. If you do not understand what to fight, you will fight stuff that you actually should not fight. for example, immigrants or trans people or whatever. You know what I mean? People need to understand exactly what is going on. And the only way we can do that, and we do that in the university, but that's just a select group of elite people. We need everyone. You know, it's not that only university students are smart. I believe that everybody is equally smart. Just some people have more chances than other people. That's the way I see it. And I think we need, Peter, myself, Asal, as academics, actually we need to use that knowledge that we get from books and from research and everything, and throw it into the common population, you know, and see how can we make that understanding that we have, how can we share that.
And that's what we need too. And that's the message that we have that's different from everyone else who want to divide people. And there are a lot of people who have leftism as a competition. Oh my God, I did this. What do you do? I organized this event. I'm more leftier than thou. That is not how we should be thinking about community building and revolutionary thought. This is what me and Rome's playing. Rome is killing the game. Rome is on the front lines of this goddamn battle, building community gardens, thrift stores, feeding the poor in multiple states on this country. But not everyone can do what Rome does. Rome is a very special, talented individual. But if you can stay at home and knit sweaters for a movement, imagine if it's cold and you got striking workers and you just knitting like warm sweaters for them to wear. You making hot tea for them to drink. That's you contributing to the movement. If you're a professor, like the people I'm talking to here today, and you can contribute to the movement by teaching the people on the ground how to be more effective, that's very, very valid and very, very needed, right? And the same goes for anything. This is not pulling rank. This is not saying the doctors are more important than the activists. I'm saying that it's a moving, shifting puzzle. There's some people that can only be educators. There's some people that may bake a pie and go to a protest and feed people so they can maintain their energy throughout the protest. And you guys see the main progressive establishment, they don't think this way. I know for a damn fact because I will criticize AOC, and I think I did a lot. I don't need to brag, but I think I did a lot as an activist. But whenever I'll criticize AOC, they're like, how dare you criticize AOC? What have you done? Immediately pulling rank because leftism is a competition to them instead of a moving part, like a moving organism, for the lack of a better term, that need to continue to grow. That's why I love the perspective that you guys bring. And I think we talked about it before, but Wednesday morning, because I know you guys wake up early to do these shows, but Wednesday mornings having like just a show to debunk anti-intellectualism, because I'm not going to fall for it. And honestly, our channel would grow much faster if I did. Like, if I was the black guy who like, oh, I'm gonna speak out against the wokeism. I'm gonna explain why critical race theory is destroying the black. Like, if I did that, bro, we'd be at 100,000 subscribers already. But I'm not gonna engage in it. Like, that's anti-intellectualism. It's hurt our community. It serves us no good other than dividing the workers. Like, and one last thing I want to say, and I'll open back to the panel because Cream said so many good things there. It set me off. One last thing. I don't think I mentioned this, but the Black Panthers and many other successful revolutions and revolutionary groups, I should say, they'll hold monthly theory readings. Like the Chicago chapter, you know, the one that Fred Hampton ran, the one that was massively successful. They will have community events where they will just have people preaching. Where you guys think them famous Fred Hampton speeches come from? Fred Hampton, he used to go to public spaces and they'll have events and he would just talk because he knows how important that is. People now demonize that. Oh, he's just a podcaster. No, I'm preaching to as many people as I can, right? But anyway, that's my little spiel on that. There was a lot good said from Cream. Peter and Saul, do you have anything you want to add to that before I move to the next part?
Asa, you want to jump in first? There's a lot of threads there that I was gonna tie together.
No, you go. Go ahead.
Okay, like so, it reminded me of, you know, like there were a bunch of different things said by all of you that I think an example might help illustrate. Like, so remember the Bolivian coup, where there were a lot of people who were, you know, you would consider themselves leftists or liberals who were broadly in support of it. Or even right now, there's a lot of like liberals and some people who call themselves leftists who very much are worried about a Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they think that the U.S. government is playing a good role to help prevent that. And then leftists who are better informed on these issues would look at those people and say, well, these people are imperialists. They're in favor of U.S. empire. And that's true objectively. Like they are supporting by their opinions imperial actions in Bolivia and in Europe. But you have to remember, you have to think: do they really know everything that I know? Have they read what I've read? Because in the overwhelming majority of cases, you're not dealing with people who have actually read the counter arguments or have ever really encountered them at all. So for the Bolivian coup example, if you ask people, let's dive down into the critiques, the indigenous critiques of Evo Morales, and think about what he should have done instead, and then look at the composition of the social movements arrayed against him. If they knew all of that, then I think the overwhelming majority of them would not have supported the coup. Likewise, if people in the US today knew about the promise not to expand NATO eastward, the argument about just putting yourself in the shoes of a Russian foreign policy thinker looking at this offensive military alliance on their doorstep, these are the kinds of arguments that those people I'm talking about that we might correctly designate as kind of left imperialists. Those are the arguments that they are ignorant of, the vast majority of them. So don't just throw up your hands and say, well, these people are irredeemable. They're taking a pro-imperialist position. I guarantee you, if you delve into their thinking, in 9 out of 10 cases, it's because they have not heard the counter arguments. So that's where conquering the curse of knowledge for us becomes extremely important. We cannot assume that everyone knows what we know. The problem is the way our brains work. We read a book or we have a conversation with someone in which we learn about something. And then instead of keeping in our mind, wait, I used to be ignorant of this. Just a day ago, I did not know this. Instead of doing that and then assuming that everyone else is likewise ignorant, just as we used to be yesterday, we unthinkingly kind of assume that everyone has the same knowledge base. So if they take a different position, they're taking that different position because they know what we know, but nonetheless, they're supporting empire or what have you. But that's not the case in the vast majority of instances. So education there becomes really important. Yeah, like AOC, and the perfect example. I would bet any money that she was just ignorant of the actual political situation on the ground there. So she sees some Bolivians constituents come to meet with her, and she's like, "Oh, Bolivians, like they're part of the global South. Like, yeah, I'll meet with them. They're good."
Bernie Sanders had these ridiculous takes as well on foreign policy. I mean,
yeah, when you hear them talk, especially like when I saw the video of her talking about the Cuba blockade situation, I'm like, this is someone who's just not good at explaining this stuff. Like, I just don't know what else to say. Like, this is someone who, like, it sounds like a kid who was doing like a book report on a book they didn't read. Like, but anyway, we got about 15 minutes left, so I want to explain from my point of view, because I think we are on the role of media, right? And this is why I advocate for as many independent channels as possible. Like, we need to blanket the news. And to be honest, I don't even know if this is even an effective strategy. Like, I'll be working these things out. The goal of the strategy is to neuter corporate media. And I'm not telling you guys I know all the answers. My hypothesis is I think we should blanket the independent news, not just YouTube. I'm on Substack too. Kareem Batesh, Pierre Beatty's on Substack as well. Asal Rod is I don't know, like I don't remember exactly her platform, but great writer as well. As many outlets as possible. You're on Twitch, whatever you can do, because people need to completely like get rid of corporate media in their diet as a whole, because it created this anti-intellectual space, this hyper partisanship that has people like, how do you go from complaining about kids in cages when Donald Trump is president, but now you're silent about it now? Like, what's driving the tribalism that makes you that intellectually inconsistent? And that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. Like, when I explain how corrupt Barack Obama and Joe Biden is, but someone who has a diet of CNN and only MSNBC is looking at me wide-eyed. What? Like, they never heard this stuff before. And I'm broadly introducing that because we are kind of running out of time. But the media is the biggest obstacle as leftists, because you see you guys kind of pointed this out earlier. They will quickly highlight a right-wing like culture war protest, right? Stop the mask, like all this other stuff that don't really like challenge power. But will they highlight a workers' protest? Right? They don't do it that often. Like, you got people still repeating the nonsense that the worker movement is dying. We got concrete workers striking. You got Amazon workers unionizing all over the country. You got there's a mass withholding of labor that's going on that's not even being discussed about because it's all about distraction. That picked the most. And I'm not even saying these issues aren't important. Like, some of these issues are important, but they will pick what's the most divisive issue we can possibly pick, and then let's blast that. Mandates, vaccine mandates. They talk about that all the time. Nothing else. Meanwhile, if you talk to people are like, yeah, I want health care. I want to increase wages. So they're not going to highlight those protests too. They'll advocate for that stuff. They're not. We had a March for Medicare for All in 50 cities. 50 cities. I gave a speech at the Kansas City protest. There was a lot of people there, maybe 50, 60 people. Nobody covered that. No coverage on CNN, MSNBC, but they covered the mandates. Which, once again, I'm not saying none of these issues are not important, but you got to ask yourself why they choose some issues over the other ones, right? Why do they focus so much on abortion instead of healthcare? Because they know healthcare will be unifying. Not saying abortion is not important, but you guys see the point I am making. So I'm gonna pass that broadly to A1. The role of the media and the threat that they pose. That's kind of the question. I will start with Peter. We go Saul and then Kareem, and then we start to wrap up.
All right. Well, I would love to just like summarize my book in like 5 seconds, but I can't. But if you're interested in the media and how it interacts with our psychology to affect politics, if you're rich, buy the book. But if you're not, just go on Library Genesis and download it for free. Or you could read another good one is Hate Incorporated by Matt Taibbi. He talks about the only thing I left out of my book, which is like the most recent evolution of the media system into like two partisan camps for pro-Democrat, pro-Republican. And then, of course, Manufacturing Consent is a classic on that. But like when you're dealing with those kinds of people, the people that actually do tune in to the mass corporate media and end up having a horribly inaccurate view of how the world works. There are a couple of things. One is actually from Blaise Pascal in the 16th century. I was shocked to read this because it's very much in accord with recent psychological research. He said, when you wish to correct another with advantage, basically, like when you wish to persuade someone, first look at the way that they see the issue. That's kind of what Nick did with starting off with, what are your issues? But even if you're dealing with like a Fox News person, ask them like, how do you see the issue? And try to find something in what they say that's accurate. And for anyone, you can find something. If they watch Tucker Carlson, they'll at least have like halfway good opinions on bombing Syria, for instance, because they actually heard an argument against bombing Syria on that show. So look for something that they actually have right and build up rapport by saying, yeah, absolutely, that is correct. Or if they're a Trump fan, absolutely, the political system is extremely corrupt. Then you're reducing the pain of saying, you're wrong, I'm right, you need to now believe what I believe. That's what you have to work at avoiding, even though in reality you're trying to get them to look at things from your perspective. One thing that can help is finding something that they believe that's actually true and affirming that. Find something to affirm about them, and then they'll be a little more open to changing their mind. The other idea I have is, and this has not been tested, so there's no major psychological research that I'm aware that actually tests this, but in my own personal experience, this sometimes can work. When you find yourself talking with someone who's actually among the politically informed minority, but they've been misinformed, then try to move away from the first order political disputes. So if you're talking about immigration, see if you can, instead of just arguing about immigration, move it to the second order. By that, I mean, move it to the question of how should we be informing ourselves about politics? What sources do you use? Fox, Breitbart, Rush Limbaugh's dead, but whoever else is now on the right-wing radio scene. Get them to say, what they're
Charlie Kirk now. I think Charlie Kirk is
Yeah.
like the Rush Limbaugh today, right?
Great,
That was a
awesome.
guess.
We got a replacement so fast. Lovely. But like to move the conversation to how should we inform ourselves? Like, okay, those are your sources. You trust them for your own reasons. What about if, you know, there is a really good argument that you never see there because they're all conservative sources? And then the final thing is we have to have kind of like a list of media sources that they can turn to. Because I've been caught unprepared on this many times, because even in my book, I'm like, you know, there isn't just one go-to source where you can see the range of ideological debate and left positions are actually represented strongly. That just doesn't exist. So we have to have ready to give people a number of media sources, like, you know, Naked Capitalism, go to that for economic news. Your show, go for that for the people that like to have, like, you know, debates and roundtables about political issues. But have a number of sources that you can immediately give people, and that comes after you trying to shift the debate to the second order of how should we inform ourselves about politics, instead of sticking with the first order issues, where if you're dealing with someone who's very indoctrinated, it's very difficult. They have these very strongly encoded schemas in their brain that are very difficult to disentangle. But perhaps by moving it to the second order. But finally, don't worry about them so much because they're only maximum 20% of the population.
Well said, Peter. I want to get Saul in here. I want to actually share one of my favorite tweets of Saul, because we were just talking about how, like, kind of the media, how they can misinform people. And if you guys not following Saul on Twitter, you guys are missing out, because this is how you can be misinformed by watching or reading the neoliberal establishment media news. Once again, I love this tweet by Saul. You see how they can twist and manipulate a story and having people believe in a reality that doesn't really exist, and they can sound credible while they do it to the politically ignorant. Like, if you don't know the situation, like our friend Saul here does, you can read their headline and think this is a legit headline, right? So the evictions, which is forced expulsions in Jerusalem, become focus of the Palestinian struggle. That's what it should really say. You see how they use small language changes in media that can shift the narrative? They said the effort to evict 6 Arab families. You mean ethnically cleansed Palestinians? It said from their contested neighborhoods. You mean from their homes? I love this tweet from Assault. But I think this is a good way to introduce Assault in this conversation on how the media, do you see how the media do small stuff like this to shift the narrative in a Zion, not even just a Zionist point of view, but that's in this example. But they do it all the time on all the stories, right? But I think I want to share this because I think it's a good way to get Assault in here. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, that happens all the time. And I think Kareem pointed this out earlier when he said the sort of like the words that are used, again, intentionally so, to make this asymmetrical way of discussing anything. So these, you have to like look for them. They're little clues to know what you're dealing with. That one of the most egregious, which actually CNN had to correct, I think it was yesterday, the day before, they referred to Palestinian settlers. Just imagine calling Palestinian settlers. It's the reversal of the language. It's become so egregious because people are starting to recognize, I think, to a certain extent, how bad things are framed. You look at the Biden decision last week to steal, that's the word, steal Afghan assets. And the way that it's framed is, oh, the Biden administration decides, first of all, as if it has the authority to do so, right? There's no question, there's no challenge to the fact that why is the US deciding what to do with another country's central bank assets? There would never be a reversal where we would accept that fact. But for some reason, it's totally fine. This is normalized. It's normal for the United States to decide what to do with the assets of another country, but then decided to split those assets. That's the word that was used, split. No, they didn't decide to split assets. They decided to steal assets. That's what it is. But we don't call it that. Whereas if we were talking about a U.S., so-called enemy, they would have no problem calling them out for what it is. You see, I think we brought this one up last time, a piece that said something like, it was about the ongoing war in Yemen. It's a Saudi-led war with U.S. complicity, a Saudi-led blockade that is killing Yemenis with U.S. complicity. And the headline was something like, Yemen has become a proxy war for Iran against Israel. And it's like, that is the most ludicrous way of framing a civil war in a country where another country, Saudi Arabia, has led a bombing campaign for years and a blockade, all with US support. But so that's another key phrase that you'll always find. Iran backed. Everything is Iran backed. Because we've spent decades doing this. We've spent decades creating two very basic pillars of foreign policy in the US. One is that Iran is bad. The other is that Israel is good. So when you want to decode and just say something is bad, you put Iran in front of it. When you want to say something is good, you put Israel in front of it. As if Iraqi Shiites have no agency, as if Houthi Yemenis have no agency, as if no one has agency, and Iran is this puppet master that is doing everything everywhere. Notice when we talk about a Saudi-led coalition, I'm not saying that the Saudis are puppets of the United States. The United States is complicit in what is happening. But this is the interesting thing. You had, I think it was McMaster who said something like, even if the Iranians, something to the effect that basically said that because if they are Iranian weapons, that means Iran is responsible morally for what is happening if the Houthis attack. But at no point does the logic say, then what about the overwhelming amount of Yemeni civilians that have died with US arms? Doesn't that directly mean then that the US is responsible for that? But it's this double speak. It's like we live in a land where no one is understanding that you cannot create one set of rules for one country or one group of people and a different set of rules for another country and another group of people and pretend like this is not politicized or we are on the moral high ground. We aren't. But again, it's the language that we use. It's the way that we talk about it. And it happens all the time with the media because there's no challenge to the status quo. And something else, and this will be the last thing I say, but something else, I just wanted to point this out because it was funny. I had a tweet where I basically said, like, just imagine, just think about this. How much propaganda do you have to be fed as an American to believe, to internalize and believe that starving to death Afghans because we have stolen their assets to pay 9/11 victims for a crime that they and their country did not commit makes sense, but the United States has no responsibility to pay any victims of its war on terror? Nothing. We don't have to pay anything for that. It makes no sense. And someone responded, and this is the part that I wanted to say, someone responded saying that what I said is inaccurate by using what? A White House statement. That's what I'm talking about. When I say the propaganda, that is what I'm talking about, because the White House statement is not framing, it will never say, hey, we just decided to steal this money because we have access to it.
Are you telling me the US government lies? So are you telling me the US government was give us inaccurate information? How dare you?
And it's amazing how many times we have on record, even the exact, we criticize the New York Times, we criticize the Washington Post, but even they have covered the amount of times that the United States government has lied. They covered it with the Iraq War. They covered it with Afghanistan, saying that the American public has been misled for years on Afghanistan. So even these papers are explaining this is what is happening. And then somehow US officials are offended that people want proof for something, as if they could possibly lie. Like, how many times do you have to lie before you realize that, yeah, no one trusts you? So it's this over and over again problem. And like I said, a lot of it stems from the fact that it's corporate. These are all people these are people who want jobs, and they get jobs if they parrot these lines. They don't get jobs if they try to challenge that. And we've actually seen reporters be dismissed from their posts, right? Because they actually challenge something. So it's built into the system.
I think what Asal's trying to say is that she, quote, takes solace in Russian propaganda, like Ned Price just said last week. That was my favorite part of the exchange.
Why would anyone listen to anything the United States government says at this point? It's beyond me. After I just put up 2 stories, saw referenced it as well. 2 decades of officials lying about Afghanistan. And if you want to know details, a lot of details said there were a lot of generals who were making false victory statements, and they knew it wasn't true. They had no idea what they was doing. They had no idea who they was fighting. Like there was a lot of times where there was Afghan warlords who they was working with, who they would tell the United States, "Oh, this person right here is a terrorist." So then the United States would take them, send them to Guantanamo Bay. But the reason why they sent them there is because that was some guy that he didn't like. That's how bad U.S. intelligence was in Afghanistan, and that's some of the crimes we committed. Constant innocent people in torture. But anyway, we don't have to go there. I want to get Kareem Batesh in here for his last thoughts on this is pretty much the last statement. So just general thoughts at this point on anything that we just talked about recently. Kareem, anything you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah. So you said like who? What did you just say, Nick? You said like who would take any information from the U.S. government, or who would believe any information?
Who would believe it? Like, there's this guy who just debated Nico House like a few months ago, and we covered this on our show. And Nico House, I don't even know the topic, but he was saying if you don't trust the CIA, who do you trust? And he was being and it was one of the questions when Nico was like, how do I even respond to this? So that's the worldview a lot of people have with it. They cannot even imagine not trusting our institutions. So sorry, Kareem, I want you to continue, but that's their mindset. You're muted, by the way. Check your audio.
Sorry. Yeah, that's exactly something that I wanted to highlight. You said who is going to believe the U.S. government, and I actually wanted to say, yeah, you'll be surprised. A lot of people. If you open the mainstream media in my country, the Netherlands, but also in other parts of Europe, for example, Germany or the UK, you will see the same nonsense propaganda about Russia and China and so forth, and continuously this whole narrative of human rights that the United States is trying to spread around the world. And that's why I'm going to be a bit more pessimistic than Peter and Asal, who said that, hey, listen, most people are against war. You know what I mean? So we just need to reach these people. Yes and no. The problem is, even though most people are against war, I believe you guys, that's definitely true. But the media is so incredibly powerful in shaping the narrative that they can create a problem and sway public opinion to pro-war within a day. Okay, they will write stuff about Taiwan. Okay, that an invasion in Taiwan is imminent, and you will see suddenly 70% of the people support a military intervention in Taiwan. It's shocking. And don't think that a society that supports terrorist groups and death squads and bombs country to Stone Age in the Middle East is not willing to allow something to happen on its own soil to sway people towards pro-imperialism. You already saw it with 9/11. One terrorist attack, man, and all of the West wants to bomb the Middle East into the Stone Age. So there again, it's so important. One thing is so important that we really start to do now, and that is in the information age, we have an extra task. Okay, in the old days, you had already political education among the civil rights movement and all these activists. We now in 2022 have a new task as well as activists. In the information age, and immunizing ourselves against media propaganda should become a necessary aspect of political education and activism. Okay, when we are in city halls, when we are doing mutual aid, one of the crucial aspects needs to become how do we immunize average people in our societies against this sewer of disinformation coming through the mainstream media. This must become a necessary aspect. And if that means that you need to convince people to throw out their television, then let's do that. You know what I mean? But what the problem is we can educate people all we want if every day they sit behind the television and get all that crap inside of their minds. It's gonna be like as we say in Dutch, it means that we will be mopping with the water tap open. That's what we say in Dutch. Okay, that's a Dutch saying. Mopping the floor while the water tap is open. Okay, so it means you can go on and on and on, and it never stops. So this is a crucial aspect we need to start focusing on as well. And that's it. I'm done.
Yeah, well said. This is just a great conversation, and we're gonna have a lot more on these kind of very important topics of discussion. Once again, we want to have a revolutionary discipline left. And the last thing I would end on, because you guys think I was bullshitting you with that clip. Now, this is a funny clip to end on. This is very hilarious. I love this clip. So our establishment adjusted to the freedom, the new age of information better than we thought. I had a lot of hopes with Gen Z, and this is what Cream was telling us about, right? How fast they can get people to support war and imperialism, which, as Caleb Hoffman explained, is a system, right? Which the CIA is a part of, right? So there's this bread tube that where you have Vosh, all these people that are pushing CIA talking points under a socialist leftist banner. I'm a socialist, I'm anti-establishment, but I believe everything the CIA tells me. And this, the only reason I'm bringing this up, because this is what Cream is saying. Even if things are changing, we cannot underestimate their ability to switch the narrative just like this. And if you want, I don't know if this is a funny video or something that made you lose your hope in humanity. I actually don't know which one it is. So let's watch this video. This is a funny way to end. So check this out. This is the Gen Z liberals we got to deal with now.
Your argument is here just
Hunter,
because they.
Honestly, I don't even know how to have a conversation with you because you live in a fantasy world. Like I just didn't imagine having to come here and explain to you, hey, the CIA is nefarious. Like literally the same intelligence community that was responsible for the overthrowing multiple.
If you don't trust the CIA, then who do you trust? If you don't trust like our intelligence.
Intelligence community that was responsible for the overthrowing multiple.
If you don't trust the CIA, then who do you trust? If you don't trust like our intelligence systems, then who do you trust?
Are you serious? Do you genuinely trust the CIA?
I'm asking you who you trust. 75%. Do you trust them? Do you trust them 50%?
Why the fuck would I trust the CIA?
Well, you said it's.
I am a black man in America.
What does that have to do with anything? What?
I would trust the CIA, bro. I'm genuinely curious.
Wait, so if you don't trust the CIA or you don't trust like our institutions, then what do you trust? Who do you trust?
That are gathered through primary sources, and
is the CIA not ever a primary source? Do you think maybe the CIA has access to information that we as the like regular public doesn't?
Lies for a living, Hunter. I don't know how else can I explain this to you? They lie for a living.
I just don't think you realize how silly you sound when you say, I don't trust the CIA. I just trust hard data. Like, how do you know? How do you find that? How do you go about like, how, if you don't trust our institutions, then who the fuck do you trust?
Hold on. The same CIA that said Gaddafi was killing his.
Yeah, and this is why political education is so important, because if you actually have read some things, you have your answers ready to him. Okay, I understand the frustration of Nico House, but I think the way he dealt with it was not wise, because he's just saying like, how can you not? Now people are not convinced by that stuff. Just tell them this happened. I can show you this. I have here a book. I have here a website. This for your audience. If you guys want to know what the CIA did. But if you just use emotion back and forth, you're not convincing anyone. Again, education, very, very important.
Yeah, so that's. I want to share that. I'll pass it to you, Peter, but I want to share that clip because that's something what Kareem said, right? Like, there's this anti-war sentiment, but now you got people like Vosh and Hunter, apparently, who's reprogramming the Gen Z mind. And honestly, like, I don't even know why I was saying that situation, to be honest. Like, I think Nico, and honestly, like, he was just shocked at the pure. I'll probably be shocked into submission later, and then I'll be kicking myself like, man, I should have said this. But I'll be like, what do you just what? But anyway, sorry, Peter, go ahead. I don't know how I would have handled that, to be honest.
Well, yeah, the problem is, sorry, Peter, to interrupt one more time. The problem here is you and I, and that's that curse of knowledge Peter talked about. you and I stand on the side of Nico House because we know Nico makes sense. The problem is people who are not aware will think Nico House is an emotional guy who is just shouting stuff because he doesn't come with ready answers. I'm not saying that he doesn't know. I'm pretty sure he does know. He's a smart guy. The problem is guys like this, and Voice is very good at that as well. They use their debate tactics to make you look like a fool. And if you have no proper answer, even though they are the fool, they convince their general audience to make the person who's right look like a fool. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would have reacted probably the exact same way, except maybe like I would have had an aneurysm from laughing so hard. But like, that what Cream said is it's exactly that. I would have been affected by the curse of knowledge there because I just would have assumed that somebody who presents, I don't know who the fuck that guy is. I don't care to know. But like, I would have assumed that somebody who has like a YouTube show on politics,
relatively popular, which is terrible. I literally was like, please don't be popular. Please don't be popular. And then I saw how many subscribers he had. I'm like, God damn it. God damn it. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, like I would have assumed that he would have had the base of knowledge where he would understand at least, you know, some of the simplest facts about the CIA's history over the past half century or so. And then when he was just like, what does being a black man in America have to do with anything? Like he was just kind of like incredulous. Like this makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I did an entire breakdown.
I mean, like, yeah, if you want to make the point that actually in America, the main U.S. government body responsible for using violence to crush political movements for improvement, that was the FBI. Okay, fine. Like it was the FBI that was assassinating leaders and infiltrating movements and trying to crush them and doing so successfully. But abroad, I mean, just all throughout Africa, the CIA was doing nothing but trying to stop any sort of national liberation movement that would use the resources of those countries for the benefit of the people. I mean, you can look at Ghana. Congo is probably the most just saddening, terribly depressing example. But yeah, like Kareem said, like if you're in a situation like that where you're dealing with someone who has a lot of information in their brain, like if we looked at it, we would say, oh my God, this is a horrible store of information because it's missing some of the most important facts. But regardless, they have a lot of information in their brain. If you're in that kind of situation, then absolutely you've got to prepare ahead of time and give them some education because that guy is clearly just jaw-droppingly ignorant about this topic.
I'm so mad that we don't have a Saul's video today. I really wish we had a Saul's reaction to that video as well. I know we got to wrap up here soon. I had to show that video because I had to show you guys what I was talking about. And Cream made a great point. I know we went a little bit longer, but we don't wrap it soon. So I'm gonna give you a chance to add anything else if you want to before we wrap up. But I have nothing else to add to that video. We already did a breakdown on how that's ridiculous. That video is like 3 months old, and I did it at the time. I feel like I don't have to explain why that video is ridiculous, right? To you guys, please. I mean, to our audience, I think you guys know. Like, we don't have to do enough. We ran out of time. We don't have to explain to you guys why that video is ridiculous, right? Okay. All right, Saul, you have anything you want to add?
Well, now that I've replaced my jaw back on my face, the only thing I'll add, because I think actually this is one aspect of it that we shouldn't overlook, is if someone makes that argument and you want to challenge them, the challenge is less so about, but this is what the CIA did, because I oftentimes actually think that they are aware. But the challenge of it is that person accepts US empire. That's it. You can trust the CIA if you simply do not care about the amount of death, destruction, and carnage that we unleash upon the world. Then you can make that argument. So it is a valid argument as long as you do not care about those consequences. The facts that we have are that is the consequence of their actions, and by their very definition and nature, it is clandestine, right? It is a secretive operation to overthrow over governments. These things come out later. But the fact that someone would make that statement, the reason why we shouldn't be terribly shocked is because, yeah, some people are fine with US empire. Everyone doesn't disagree with it. Some people think that this is a great idea because some people genuinely don't care. I mean, you had Charlie Kirk today, I think that's the person we were talking about earlier, saying that asking for his vaccine card at Corner Bakery is the same thing as the Holocaust. So, you know, people think it's not that he doesn't know what Nazi Germany is. It's not that he doesn't know what the Holocaust is. It's that he actually he just doesn't care. These things don't affect certain people. And I think that's part of the thing that we also have to accept. Is like, that's what they're saying. Essentially, they're saying, well, of course I trust the CIA because the CIA is out for me and my empire and my people and my group. And I don't care about this notion of community and internationalism and people of different they don't care. And so we have to sort of resign ourselves to certain segments of the population that think that way.
Yeah, an extremely small amount, because if you're in the CIA, for instance, then, I would imagine that most people, probably just by number count, are not very well aware of like the CIA's full history. They're most likely taught a kind of bowdlerized version that cuts out all of the nasty stuff and just focuses on, what the average American would find good. But there are certainly people who are perfectly well aware. I did a survey of IR professors and asked them like a bunch of questions about like the nasty side of US foreign policy. And they did pretty well on the quiz. So you're right, there are people that are informed, but they have a way of thinking that excuses away all of the evil side. But just keep in mind, when we're talking about normal people, the overwhelming majority of people, they have a deficiency in their information. And the people who are not deficient in information and are just deficient in their moral reasoning, those are thankfully a minority.
You couldn't hear me, or you couldn't see my face, but I was nodding in agreement.
So I like the idea of us having the Wednesday show, like Wednesday morning. I think it'd be easier for you guys as well. We talk about it. I guess we make it. I'll make an official announcement sometime next week once we nail it down for sure. But yeah, it was a great discussion. We still got a lot more to explore, but I think just like an hour Wednesday morning show, because we're not going to be the channel that scratches like the anti-intellectual itch that a lot of people have, right? So, but anyway, I got one more super chat right before I wrap up. I put all the super chats on the screen as well. It's really hard to read all of them when we're in these discussions, but we appreciate everyone who do leave super chats. I'll try to give everyone at least some time on the screen. Thank you for the $5, Aliyah. The easiest way to explain the CIA's oppression is how they got Freeway Rick Ross to flood black neighborhoods with crack. I gotta wrap up, but I told you I can literally do a whole segment. I'm actually gonna talk to Shahid Buttar because we're gonna have a whole segment devoted on the CIA. Because I said Shahid called my bluff because I said I'm not interested in any candidate that's running unless they're running on abolishing the CIA. And then Shahid hit me up. He was like, I'm running on abolish CIA. And I'm like, I guess you called my bluff. So I guess I'll talk to you about that. So I'm going to save my analysis for later because we really do got to wrap up here soon. But that's when I grew up as a black man, we all heard stories about the CIA selling crack in the ghetto, right? Then Rick Ross, as this guy explained here, if you guys know the famous rapper Rick Ross, he stole the name of the original infamous dealer who alleges, which I don't see why anyone would believe the CIA over him. He said the CIA was in contact with him and many of his business associates. And we all know that they sold crack in the ghetto in order to fund Operation Condor and other off-the-book attacks on socialism and in the global south and fighting against the Cold War. Anyway, I'm going on a rant. We talk about it another day. We're going to be back next Thursday night, right? Same time, International Leftist Coalition. Tomorrow, I will be back with my 10 demands, brothers and sisters, Awkward and Zoya. Sabby shows tomorrow as well. Luna Oy will be on here Saturday.
So say hi to Awkward for me. I think that guy does amazing stuff.
Yeah, I got to get you guys on the panel together. I think you guys would be great on discussion a lot of issues. So we got to do that here soon. But we got a really crazy next 2 weeks, like in terms of guests. Savvy our women's panel. Dr. Luna Oy. Like I'm gonna have her. I actually would love to have Luna Oy on one of these International Leftist Coalition panels, actually too. I think she'd be great. Ron Pacone will be joining us. Nick and CJ on Monday. Lee Camp will be joining me on Friday. That's gonna be a foreign policy conversation because Lee Camp, one of the few people that actually been highlighting the genocide that the Biden administration have been complicit with in Yemen and Afghanistan and Palestine. While you know that a lot of people focus on distractions, Lee Camp, I like him because he's funny and he's like laser focused on like real issues. Like you don't see Lee Camp talking about a lot of bullshit often. Like he talk about real serious shit. So that's next Friday. Either way, we got a great week, and CJ and them sure got guests on private game about as well. Is there anything else? I want to make sure. Oh yeah, make sure you guys subscribe to BetBeat Media, their Substack as well. Make sure you guys support them. They friends of the show. They'll be back as well. Thank everyone for watching. This is SocialistMMA. We sign out. Take care, my friends.